welcome in to the Fantasy Basketball Podcast, episode number 3. We're going to be talking forwards today. I'm hesitant to even ask, but James, how are we doing today?
Oh, I'm on one today. I've had a Murphy's Law. It's been a rough one. This is our third attempt to get this show because I've been having mic problems, technical difficulties. So I just said bag it, and I went out and I bought another one, only to get home and find out that none of the connectors matched, and my beautiful little cone pop filter is too big. I need to take a Xanny pill and enjoy my weekend is what I need.
Yeah, popping a Xanny. I didn't expect you to go that far, but after watching this morning, I really wish that our show would have been on video this morning, because James went mute for a little while, and all I could see is him in a screen going absolutely nuclear. And it was fantastic to watch. It was more entertaining than talking basketball, to tell you the truth. I mean, it was fantastic to watch. So, but we're here, we're good, we can hear each other, and I think we're ready to go. So, like I said, we're going to go through forwards today. We talked about point guards and shooting guards the last couple of shows. We're going to go through our rankings and come up with a consensus here. We had Fantasy Pros and Yahoo and our own rankings, put them in the rankings machine, popped out numbers for us. So we're going to talk about essentially the top 15 fantasy forwards. There are also a couple of honorable mentions that we didn't want to leave out today. So we're talking about that today. We're going to start with some breaking fantasy news. And one advantage to having James' technical meltdown this morning is we have a little bit more on the Ime Udoka situation. Yesterday during the show, we had talked about how it looked like he was going to be suspended for a season. That has indeed come down. But I don't know did you catch the Celtics news conference, James?
No, I stopped listening when it was brought to my attention that his fiance is Nia Long. And then I thought, wait a minute. So you had a relationship with a staffer while you were engaged to Nia Long, who, for those of you who don't know who Nia Long is, she was Will Smith's girlfriend in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And in the hierarchy of like the teen beat scene back when I was growing up, Nia Long and Tiffany Amber Thiessen were battling for supremacy upon the top. And I was so shook after that. Just let him go. A year isn't enough. Just let him go. He obviously isn't of sound mind to run a franchise like the Boston Celtics if you're making decisions like that.
Well, if you thought that was the most egregious part of it, I think more is going to be on its way, because it really sounds like this is much more than just a consensual relationship that the Celtics found out about. So there has been a months-long investigation into this whole situation, and Matt Barnes just came out on Twitter probably 15-20 minutes ago. He was defending Ime yesterday, and he said after he sent out his tweet, which has now been deleted, he got a phone call from one of his sources, and he said that it's 100 times worse than what you think. So there is going to be more to this,
and that's a lot.
Yeah, and
that's a lot coming from Matt Barnes,
because
that's a guy who has gone through his own dirty laundry story with Derek Fisher, and we don't need to iron it out here. But if you're interested in a fun wormhole story, go back and look at Matt Barnes and Derek Fisher's relationship, and if it's anything like what that turned into, a season might be something that Ime should thank everybody in the upper management for.
Yeah, my guess is he's going to be toxic now. I can't imagine he works in the league again once this leaks out. I guess to you, if it's 100 times worse, maybe he cheated on Nia Long with Tiffany Amber Thiessen. Maybe she's working in the Celtics front office, and that's what makes it 100 times worse.
Look, if you're a Pie Gal player, you can stay at the table for a while by pushing, right? Nia Long and Tiffany Amber Thiessen, even that's a push. I mean, that's a hard push. That's like a push it real good.
So we're gonna, wow. So yeah, we're gonna move forward. There's gonna be more that comes out certainly in the next few days, few weeks. The Celtics are being really, really tight-lipped about it for legal reasons,
Probably
but
because he wasn't being
there's gonna be,
tight-lipped.
yeah, yeah. So we'll see. Yeah, exactly. So. It's going to get out. There's stuff like this just doesn't stay quiet forever. So we'll certainly, hold back any judgment on exactly what should or shouldn't happen with Ime moving forward. We talked a little bit about the situation with their assistant coach, Missoula, and there are going to be some after effects, but it's really hard to say what that's going to do from a fantasy perspective. There is another news nugget that came out today, and that's about one of your favorite players in the league, James. That's SGA. He's got a grade 2 MCL sprain. You're putting in the notes here it could be a shutdown situation. What are you reading about Shea Gilgeous-Alexander?
So if he's out the first couple weeks of the season, and if Oklahoma City decides that, you know what, this is Chet's out, we don't really have anything to play for, we've got all these picks, we could do one more year of the rebuild. There might be a scenario where they bring back SGA, but if there's even and this is one of those things where it's tough to believe. It's all the narrative that they spin on it. If he has recurring issues, or if setbacks or something like that, I don't even know that I'm going to believe that they're 100% real. But this is one of those instances where if you got an MCL sprain, you're not playing for anything, he's your star player, there's a high probability you could shut him down. If that's the case, Giddey's numbers are going to be through the roof. Poku gets a lot of run. Lou Dort. So there's got to be room for some of these guys in OKC to step up. But if you're not playing for anything, why risk SGA on an MCL sprain if that could potentially lead to something where that's surgery and then you miss him the first part of next season? So that's just something to keep an eye on. He moves down my draft board at this point, just with the risk of him being shut down.
Well, as we know, sprains are really tears in actuality. So I don't know enough about the situation yet to really make too much of a judgment on it. I think this is one of those let's wait and see. Let's see what the doctors say. But there is certainly a little bit more risk with him now. It doesn't look like he's going to be 100% for the beginning of the season, certainly. So we're just going to have to see in terms of what his value is going to be kind of moving forward. So let's go ahead and jump into what's going to be the meat of the show today, and that's going to be all these different forwards. And now we're lumping these guys in together. These are going to be small forwards, going to be power forwards, going to be a whole wide variety. But these are really the ones that you want to have on your fantasy basketball team. Let's start with the honorable mentions first. And the first one we have on our list is a new player, certainly to fantasy. And for those who don't follow college basketball much, this player is going to make a huge impact early. That's Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic. I'm a college or a high school basketball team coach here in the state of Washington, and I can tell you, after being part of a pretty successful program here for a number of years, there have only been really a handful of games where we've gone in and kind of looked at each other as coaches and said, there's no way we can beat these guys, no matter what strings we pull or what levers we move down. Like there just isn't anything we're going to be able to do. And I can tell you that one of those times was playing O'Day up towards Seattle in the summer, and I believe Paolo Banchero was a freshman. He may have even been an 8th grader who they moved up, and you could tell at that age that he was extraordinarily special. He just had that it factor. And for those of you out there who don't follow a lot of college basketball, certainly this is a player who blossomed last year under the instruction of Coach K at Duke, really moved up draft boards. Obviously, a lot of people thought that he would go maybe 2nd, maybe 3rd overall in the draft, ended up being taken 1st. Orlando has a history of hitting on some of those top draft picks, be it Penny Hardaway, Shaquille O'Neal, Chris Webber, who they traded, obviously, for Hardaway. I think he's going to be a player who is NBA ready. He's going to be able to see big minutes from day one, And he's a player who I think is going to come in and average 18, 19 points a game right out of the gate. He's going to get you rebounds, going to get you a handful of assists. I really like his fit in Orlando, and I think he's going to be a really good contributor.
Yeah, my only concern is the logjam of forwards already on that roster. They're just stacked. They're almost the exact antithesis of what Houston's got going on. They're loaded from a guard perspective, but we have the Wagner brothers. I'm looking at Jonathan Isaac. They did not move Mo Bamba. There was talk about that. Banchero, I think, starts day one. I think to kind of project a stat line for him this season, if he gives me 16 and a half points, 6.5 to 7 rebounds, 4.5 assists, shoots close to 48, 49%. That is serviceable, and I think that his playing time might start around that 27 minutes, work its way closer to 30. The fans are going to. The thing about Orlando is they don't really have a direction. They're not a team that's tanking, but they're also not a team that's looking to make an impact in the Eastern Conference. So he should get run. There shouldn't be any scenario in which they're sitting him. But I think that'd be a solid start. He's definitely not going to crack our 15 as a rookie. There's just too much to be seen. I think he has an NBA-ready body. I think he was probably the most NBA-ready as far as a physical specimen coming into the draft. So I like his upside. I think his ceiling is really, really, really high, and I think his IQ is such that his floor is really, really high also. So it's a solid pick if you're in the later rounds for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's one of those players who has a really high ceiling, and he could outperform his ADP or average draft position.
Do you think he's a unicorn, though?
Early this season.
Do you think he's
I don't think he's a unicorn. I don't think he's quite the unicorn. Let's talk about the player who was widely regarded as the unicorn 4 or 5 years ago, though, and that's Kristaps Porzingis. So I am just not on the Zinger bandwagon. I know that you like him a little bit more than I do, but with Porzingis, he just doesn't play enough. So we're talking less than 150 games the last 3 seasons. They talk about the best ability being availability, and he just doesn't have that. Now, we know that he can score the basketball. He's going to get you 20 points a game. He's going to get you 8 rebounds. I can tell you physically, he really is a freak of nature. So if you've ever seen him in person, it's really amazing to see a man that tall and big and lanky be able to move and shoot the way that he does. I could see why the Knicks were just salivating over his potential, at a really young age, but it just hasn't translated into. He just hasn't translated into a player who's durable enough to really be counted on. So I don't look at him as a unicorn anymore. I think that, when you go to the fair and you see somebody walking around with a donkey and they've spray painted it and then put a waffle cone on their head, that's more of the Porzingis that I see.
Like the Tijuana welcome wagon
anymore. So
the Tijuana welcome wagon, yeah.
Very much so. So yeah, I think that might be our new nickname for Porzingis. But I think you like him a little bit better than I do, correct?
Yeah, well, obviously the injuries are an issue. When he's on the floor, though, he produces. He has a history of producing in several different categories. If you're in a 9-cat league, I'm looking at how the Washington Wizards roster is lined up right now. They're actually pretty thin from the power forward center position. You got Hashimura. You've got Taj Gibson. What is he going on 55 this season? So there's going to be opportunity for him to play as long as he is healthy. I think the additions of Will Barton and Monty Morris are going to benefit him because they're not going to force him to have to be a help defender defensively because, look, Bradley Beal just doesn't play defense. End of story. So I think Kyle Kuzma stepping in. I'd like to see his defensive numbers go up this year, which takes some of the burden off of Porzingis. So he's got to be very one-dimensional. Statistics are going to come from the offensive end and then defensive rebounds just because he's long. But I don't – I look for him in the beginning rounds. Not beginning rounds, but the beginning part of the season. You're going to see some production there. If you start to see that the same old tale is coming, he's also a trade asset as well. He's one of those guys that has name value that you could move for somebody like a Montrezl Harrell that somebody might take in later rounds, not knowing much about him. And Montrez is going to play. So take him for the name value late. I definitely wouldn't take him over anybody that's coming up on this list. But when he's on the floor, he's going to give you value. Just know that it's not going to be somebody you're going to want to fall in love with or put a ring on their finger. Now, I would put a ring on our next honorable mentions finger, and that's Chris Middleton. I would have put a ring on his finger at the beginning of the season this year because I had them picked to win the NBA Finals had he not gotten injured. I definitely think Milwaukee was a better matchup for Golden State. But a very, very untimely injury for the Bucks at the worst possible time. Boston goes on to represent the East. Middleton is, if he's nothing else, he's consistent across the board. And we were talking about him previously. I think the word consistent came up like 72 times. So this is somebody who a lot of people sleep on just because he isn't flash by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he seldom talks. He just goes out there and produces in each category statistically on a game in, game out basis. So I wouldn't take the end of last season as an indicator that he's injury prone. I think it was just the worst time of year. If he's sitting there later rounds, this is a guy who you can slot into your lineup on 4-game weeks and know that he's going to give you at least 3 of them. So he's a no-brainer for me. I think we have more talent and more opportunity for fantasy points in our top 15, but Chris Middleton should be on that short list of people to take right after. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, much the same. I think if you miss out on some of these top-tier forwards and fill out your roster with some of these that we're talking about early in the program here, you really can't go wrong with Middleton. And again, the buzzword with him is consistency, but it's true. This is a guy who's going to get out there and give you 21 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists almost every night. Now, the upside isn't as great as it is with some of these others. He doesn't have that blow-up potential like some of these other players we're going to talk about do. But you don't necessarily have to have that. He's a guy who, while he may not win you your fantasy matchup that week, he's not going to lose it for you either. And I agree with you in terms of durability. It's never been a problem. I don't think it's going to be a problem moving forward either. So let's go ahead and move into our top 15, and we start with kind of a new face and a new place, and that's going to be Christian Wood of the Mavericks. I really like this kid. I think that he has great upside. I think he's going to be a really good rim runner for Dallas. Last year was kind of a breaking out party for him. 18 points, 10 rebounds a game. I think he can do that in Dallas as well. I think that you hit it on the head here not too long ago when you're talking about the culture aspect of this, though. These are two teams in Texas that are doing things in a very different way. And Houston's culture over the last really 10 years or so has been that of a losing franchise. And now he's moving to Dallas where they have really high expectations. And they are set right now for a good playoff run. Luka is right in his prime. We talked about him earlier this week. He's a player who we both think has a chance to win the NBA MVP or the fantasy MVP or both. They're going to be good, and Christian Wood is going to, I think he's going to benefit from so much defensive attention being put on Luka. I think he's going to get scraps. He's going to get boards and easy putbacks. You'd like to see the block numbers go up a little bit, but I really like the fit in Dallas, and I think that in terms of upside, there are some players that have a really high ceiling, and I think he's one of them because we haven't really seen his full potential as of yet, and I think he could unlock it here in Dallas.
Yeah, the only thing that's concerning to me, because I think he's a perfect fit for Luka, and I'm not Jason Kidd, but it sounds like Jason Kidd's going to bring him off the bench and start JaVale McGee, which is just that's a mind-numbing decision as far as I'm concerned.
JaVale McGee.
I will say, even if he's coming off the bench, I would still anticipate him getting 29 to 32 minutes a game. I mean, that's just how impactful he's going to be. He fits this system. He isn't walking double-double. I think he will be for the next few seasons. So if you are in a league that is a multiplier for double-doubles, I mean, you're getting less and less of those in the league, sadly. So if you're getting a guaranteed, it allows you to kind of accept some things that you'd like to see improved. He doesn't turn the ball over for as many touches as he had in Houston. That's a plus. Blocks, there's an opportunity here for him and JaVale McGee to really be, if they're on the floor at the same time together, to do some damage. So his stat line from last year, 17, 9, 10, 17.9, 10 rebounds, 2.3 assists. I don't really see that coming up. Shoots 50% from the field. All I would ask for is maybe improve his free throw percentage a little bit, but that should be pretty consistent with what you're getting, and then you're getting that multiplier for the double-double, which offsets his three-point shooting. So I love it for Dallas. I think Dallas is primed to really get back to the Western Conference final competition or contention. So it's a great pick. I'm not as excited for the team prospects of our next pick. This is Julius Randle, the New York Knicks. Julius Randle is a guy who is on that cusp of being a great stat bad team guy. So it's hard to kind of decipher between whether or not he's somebody that you want on your fantasy roster, or is he somebody that you want on your actual team. And sometimes I don't want either. But last year averaged 20 points, just under 10 rebounds a game. So you're flirting with that multiplier. 5 assists. Shot 41% from the field. We had this conversation about RJ Barrett in the last episode. Randle really has to work for his shots. It's a lot of catch, turn, clear out. I'm going 1v1. He takes a lot of defensive matchups personally. And the relationship with New York and Randle, and then Randle in New York, I think is starting to get long in the tooth. So I definitely think there's value here. I think the addition of Jalen Brunson, what it does is it takes the pressure off of Randle to have to kind of create things solo, one-on-one. It's a third scoring option, probably going to be their second scoring option. So I'm not excited for New York by any stretch of the imagination, but I think Randle's going to have an opportunity to face a few less double teams this season. And if that's the case, and he can play like he did when he was a borderline All-NBA player 2 seasons ago, he's definitely in the top 15 for the forwards.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I just look at the Knicks, and as a basketball junkie, part of me just wants them to be good again, because I miss those games in the Garden in the playoffs with the Oregon playing and Spike Lee going out of his mind on the sidelines. And they really haven't had that since the days of Patrick Ewing and Mark Jackson and Charles Oakley. It just hasn't happened for them. And they're a franchise that to me just seems so desperate. Jalen Brunson he's a good player, but is he a player worth as much as they're going to pay him? I don't think so. So Brunson, Barrett, Randle, I mean, they have a decent core of players, but I just don't see them being a winning franchise. And Randle is one of those guys, and you touched upon it, there's an element of malcontent with him right now, and last year was not good for him. So in 2020-2021, he averaged right around 24 points a game, 10 rebounds. He was a really like a breakout fantasy stud. And last year, 21-22, scoring average goes down, rebounding average goes down, though slightly, but assists are down, steals are down. Everything is down except for the turnovers that stayed about the same. So what version of Julius Randle are we going to see? Are we going to see a motivated Julius Randle who is engaged and ready to play, or are we going to see the Julius Randle that we did last year, who's kind of, Peter Pouty out there on the court? So I don't know what we're going to get with him, but if you get the good Julius Randle, you get some really good fantasy points too, because he certainly has talent. So speaking of talent,
I hope it's Peter Pouty because I'm hoping it's Peter Pouty just because when they run their city jerseys, that would look excellent in the back of their city jerseys if it said Peter Pouty. I would buy. I think it'd be the number one selling jersey in the league. Peter Pouty.
I think, yeah. But you see that with
I
Randle,
100%.
I mean, there is that element with him where you think, man, like if you
play.
would just play, play, and
DeMarcus
everything
Cousins
will be okay in the end.
Yeah, DeMarcus Cousins
Very
was
much
that
so.
way. I definitely think DeMarcus Cousins is better than Julius Randle, but I would just get so frustrated because I'm thinking, you have. if you would just shut up, and I hate using this because then it gets thrown back in anybody who's making a critique about basketball. It's not a shut up and play in that aspect. It's more of a, if you would focus less on making yourself a villain, you would be such a hero. And his time is getting short in the league, definitely with New York, and I just don't know anybody who looks to make a package that New York's going to take. And this is one of those guys that could sadly be in a situation where if he runs his course in New York, he could still have 4, 5, 6 years left, but nobody's going to want him, and he could be out of the league. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's one of those things. It's not a make or break season for him by any stretch. I'm hoping that Brunson allows him to kind of just relax, play basketball. They're going to be a playoff team. Let's pump the brakes on whether or not they're going to be winning a championship anytime soon. But just go out there, have fun, play basketball, and that's the best version of Julius Randle when he's doing that. So I definitely want to see that.
Yeah, I do too. And in terms of villain becoming hero in New York, nobody's ever going to beat Charles Oakley. It doesn't matter now. After Oakley gets run out of the gym by the owner, and that there's no comparison between Oakley and anybody else in that respect. So Julius just needs to focus on basketball, and hopefully he does that and helps our fantasy teams. Again, another player who did last year, kind of a sleeper, maybe an under the radar player to some, Florida State kid who the Raptors took at pick 4, and you normally wouldn't say somebody who was taken in the top 4 of a draft was, necessarily a steal, but you can make a case that Scotty Barnes could have went, first, second, third in this draft. The way he played last year was really amazing. He was a great young player. So 15.3 points per game, 7.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, get you a handful of blocks and steals as well. 3-point shooting was about 30%. You'd like to see that a little bit higher, but his field goal percentage was close to 50. I really like the ceiling on Barnes. I think he's a player who is just going to continue to improve. I think he fits well with Fred VanVleet there. I think that he's going to be a player who has a chance to really move up into the all-star realm. He was up to about 36 minutes a game last year. There's always been talk about Pascal Siakam being moved, and if that happened, it would only help somebody like Scotty Barnes. I think the sky's the limit for him. I think that if you get him somewhere here in the 12, 13, 14 range of forwards, I think you're doing a pretty good job. I really like his upside. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that, depending on how your league is set up, if you could have him for the next 3-4 years, this Raptors lineup is set up to kind of really maximize what his strengths are. I would like to see them entertain offers for Siakam, but every time I say that, then Siakam goes out and starts playing, at an all-star level, borderline all-NBA second-team level. So, don't break this squad up just yet. I think once Kawhi left, there was this feeling of, well, he was the reason why we won a championship, so now it's kind of a, not a rebuild per se, but it's this try to find our identity. I'm looking at this roster right now, and they're really set up to be a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference. I think, OG Anunoby is a fantastic defensive player. Scotty Barnes is a great defensive player. Siakam is a two-way threat. So, I think bringing in somebody like Otto Porter Jr., Gary Trent, defensively, they got dog status in him. And Barnes is one of those guys that I just personally want to see succeed. I just love his attitude. I like the way he plays. So I may take a flyer on him if I'm on a 50-50 toss-up between somebody like him and our next pick or Julius Randle. So I don't think you lose with him. He's definitely not going to hurt you. And if this is indicative, his first-year stat line is indicative of what he could be doing with any kind of progression whatsoever, he's going to be flirting with that top 5 forward, or maybe not top 5, maybe top 10 forward here within a year and a half. So while he's on the trajectory up, the question mark is going to be number 12. We have DeMar DeRozan of the Chicago Bulls. Last year had an absolutely fantastic season, all-star season. He's one of those guys where it's hard as somebody who's 40 years old to look at somebody who's 33 and say, well, are we reaching that apex? Is that the best we've seen? But I think in somebody like DeMar's case, especially in an NBA that's so predicated on three-point shooting and his game is so heavily reliant upon that mid-range shot, I don't know that it's going to be something that he can duplicate. Last year, shot 50% from the field, just under 28 points a game, 5 rebounds, just under 5 assists. Defensively, that's never really been his bag. Doesn't turn the ball over for the amount of touches that he had. So this is one of those instances where if you are hoping to get the same stat line from last year, you're going to be, I think you're going to be sadly mistaken. I don't know how much it'll drop, but I do think you're going to see a dip. Field goal attempts, I think that's something that, he averaged over 20 last year, which was top 10 in the league on a team that has Zach LaVine, who's a rising star. I just don't see a duplication. And you've alluded to this in the past on being cautious of drafting guys on their career high years. It's just really, really tough to duplicate in the NBA. And I think at 33 years old, that's not saying anything whatsoever other than he has a lot of mileage. That's a lot to expect a guy to come out there and duplicate a 28 point a game at 50% clip. So I do see a retraction. I still think he's top 15 for sure. I see a little bit of a dip in his game this year.
It's hard not to when you look at DeRozan. It's very rare when somebody has a career year at 33. So apparently 33 is the new 19 when it comes to DeMar DeRozan. But you look at his shot attempts from 2021 with the Spurs, right around 15. Last year, right around 20. And for the casual fan, you might look at that and think, well, that's not that big of a deal. Yeah, it's a huge deal. A huge deal. Having 20 attempts a game and shooting at a 50% clip. So he is certainly one of those players whose usage rate was off the charts. I don't think they've done anything on their roster that should really affect that too much. I mean, LaVine is going to get his, but I think DeRozan's going to get his too. He's one of those guys, it may not be the sexiest pick in your draft, because he is just so fundamental with the mid-range game. He's not going to be a guy who goes out there and hits, 5 threes a night for you, but he's one of those rare players who can score 27, 28, 29 points a game without having that three-point shot be a huge part of what he does. So I like the rebound numbers. I think the assists will stay consistent. I think you're right, though. It's hard to take somebody when you know that that's their ceiling. I mean, I can't imagine that we're going to be sitting here next year talking about DeMar DeRozan having another career season. I just think that's about as good as he can be at age 33. So, again, one of those players who you plug in your lineup, you know what you're going to get. I think this next player, we kind of know what we're going to get, but I also think that there may be even more in store for us moving forward. A young player who has just really, really blossomed over the span of the last couple of years with a change of scenery, and that's Brandon Ingram. So when Ingram was with the Lakers, certainly he was overshadowed by a lot of other players out there, but you saw his scoring average kind of steadily creep up. So when he was a rookie, he was under 10, second year 16, third year 18. He gets traded to New Orleans, and all of a sudden we're looking at a player who's scoring 24, 25 points a game. Last year, 55 games played because of injury. Obviously, that's a concern with him. 22.7 points per game. He'll get you rebounds. He'll get you assists. I know that you and I really, really like what the Pelicans are doing right now. Again, that word consistent that we talk about a lot in fantasy. And just to kind of harp on that a little bit, there are different schools of thought in terms of how to build a roster. You can either take guys who you think have tremendous upside, or you can take those guys who you think are going to be safe. So if you're in this range and you want somebody who you think is just ultra safe, there could be some players who don't have some of the concerns that we do with Ingram. But at the same time, I think Ingram is primed to take one more baby step up. And I think this year will be one of those years where he could average 25, 26 points a game, get you 6 boards and 6 assists, and be really a top 10 forward. We have him ranked here as 11th, but it's kind of semantics when you get into this range. So I really like him. I think that he is a good young player with a long runway to grow. How about you?
Yeah, I love him. I love New Orleans. As a Blazers fan, I mean, it kills me to see a scenario where, when people talk about finding that missing piece, like we just need one more piece or one piece away. a lot of people will argue that Zion was that missing piece for New Orleans, and I don't think that was the case. I think it was CJ coming over as the missing piece, and how that kind of pertains to Brandon Ingram is you've got Zion Williamson, who the NBA is really, really going to prop up to be one of their primary faces to kind of bring that youth movement in. But CJ is the president of the Players Association. He's well respected within the league, well spoken. He's been around. He played in the Western Conference Finals. He has this, and right out of the gate, what are the things that he's saying when he's talking to the media? He's saying this is BI's team. This is Brandon's team. We're looking to win, but this is Brandon's team. And I think what Brandon never got in LA is he never got any respect. He was just he was drafted and he was left to figure it out on his own. And that it's kind of like that box of misfit toys. You had him, and you had Lonzo, and you had Josh Hart, and they just went out there and tried to wing it, and there was no leadership. And I think that's what he wants the leadership. He needs a mentor. And if he has that and somebody who respects him and has trust in him and faith in him, so to bring a guy like CJ in, who's already got a established pedigree, and to say, hey man, I could easily step in and say, we're going to get over the hump because I'm here. And he doesn't. That's the type of stuff that motivates a guy like Brandon. He played out of his mind in that playoff series against Phoenix. I think he really, really stepped up. I actually project him being an All-NBA second team candidate this year. Definitely an All-Star. I think when you're talking about All-Stars for the upcoming season, I think our next pick actually backs off of that list. I don't see any retraction whatsoever. I think this is one of those things where he knows it's his. Everybody, even Zion's come in and said this is BI's team. New Orleans is going to be a problem, not just for this season, but for the next couple seasons. If they make any moves whatsoever, they could be in the running. I have them above Memphis personally, with all the momentum that Memphis got off of their playoffs last year. I think in a 7-game series, I take New Orleans with CJ and a fully healthy Zion any day of the week, twice on Sunday. So I definitely have a high ceiling for Brandon. I think he's going to kill it. I think statistically speaking, like I said, he should meet everything he did last year, maybe even up his scoring closer to 25. And I see him looking at that. He's got to be in the consideration for the All-NBA team for sure. Now, I am less high. This is one of those guys that is polarizing for us too, because I can't stand this next pick, and you see value in him. I hate that he brings such fantasy value, because if he's on the board, I have the dichotomy of choosing, am I going to pass up, which has proven to be almost a sure thing, statistically speaking, or do I go with my gut and say, I just can't have him on my roster because I don't want to look at his image for the entire season? That's Jimmy Butler of the Miami Heat. All-Star last year, just under 50% from the field, 21.4 points, just under 6 rebounds, 5.5 assists. He's still getting you 1.6 steals, which is that's elite for a small forward in this league. I just don't like the guy. The guy's shooting 23% from the field. I do see a retraction personally, and we might differ here, but if I'm guarding and I'm putting a defensive scheme for Miami, I'm going to let Jimmy shoot all day, because he does his most damage getting downhill. He plays really, really well with Bam. Those little dumps for alley-oops. He creates a lot of that just because of his strength and size getting to the basket. I'm just going to step back and let him shoot all day. He's shooting 23% from the field, and I don't really see anything that leads me to believe that that's going to go up exponentially. So I think he can be taken out of games. And surprisingly, he only took 14.5 field goals last year. So if he starts getting in his own head when his three-point shots aren't falling and he starts to defer, that really hits him from a fantasy perspective. And other than steals, you're not getting a ton of other value from him. So I see him being in a situation that if he gets in his head, there could be a pretty significant retraction for him. And it isn't just because I don't like him. I just think the way defenses are going to play Miami this season, Kyle Lowry isn't a threat to get to the basket. Tyler Hero is, live outside that three-point line. I'm going to shade off of Jimmy in order to make sure that Hero is who I'm paying attention to. So Hero and Bam are going to be the primary point of emphasis. And that's strong words and a strong take about a guy who was an all-star last season. But I think a lot of that all-star had to do with things he did in the past and not so much what he did last season. Your thoughts?
Well, one of the things that you have to be really sensitive of and aware of as a fantasy manager is this idea of recency bias. And if you think that you're going to draft Jimmy Butler and get the same Jimmy Butler you got against the Celtics in the playoffs, you're wrong. It just doesn't work that way with this guy. He's not going to go out and give you 47, 9, and 8 on a very consistent basis like he did in the playoffs. He's one of those players who really, he kind of saves himself for the big moments. And if you just look at how he finished last year and expect that to happen during a regular season, it just isn't. It just doesn't happen that way. And you mentioned the 23% from three. His field goal percentage overall is 34. I mean, he just doesn't shoot very well. He provides a lot of other, counting stats that certainly help. He's one of those players who is ultra productive. And you basically what you're going to get. But again, it's about building a team. And I think that I'll just go ahead and punch forward into our next player. And this is where the fun happens, really, in fantasy basketball, fantasy football, fantasy whatever. There are lots of different ways to build a team. And if you want to build a team based on numbers that you can expect and taking a safe route, then you can take Jimmy Butler. And you basically know what you're going to get. It happens each and every year. This next player on the board you could take if you're somebody who is more, if you're somebody who's more of a riverboat gambler, somebody who is into taking chances, somebody who wants somebody with huge upside who could really put your team over the top, then you go ahead and take Kawhi Leonard. And Leonard is a guy who, when he's healthy and on the floor and engaged, he's a top 10 fantasy player overall. Not a top 10 forward, but a top 10 fantasy player. Injuries are a problem, and that's clear. He was just cleared for participation, I believe, a couple of days ago. Missed basically the entire season last year. But when he plays, he is a monster, and he can do just about everything. The Clippers are going to be a fun team to watch this next year. I think that they have... certainly they have a chance to be a lot better with John Wall in the fold and Leonard coming back. But I have a hard time drafting Kawhi in the range where you're going to have to take him in a draft, because people are going to look, in most leagues, are going to look at things and just see name value and think, okay, Kawhi Leonard is here at number 12, number 13, number 14. I know what he can do. He's healthy again. I'm going to take him. There is absolutely no way you can take him and expect to get 82 games out of him. I mean, I can't imagine you get 65, 70 out of him. I think it's just going to be really, really tough to count on Kawhi moving forward. And again, this just goes back to how much risk are you willing to take in order to win? And if you take Kawhi, you have to be a bit of a risk taker. I mean, you look at the last 4 seasons in terms of games played, or 5 seasons, 9, 60, 57, 52, 0. And I think that just really tells a story with Leonard. So what are your thoughts on Kawhi? Where would you take him in a draft? What are you thinking moving forward?
Okay, so this is one where you have to put your big brain hat on when it comes to Kawhi. So when he plays, we've kind of already talked that he's going to give you that top 10 value, which means his points per game from a fantasy perspective are over 50, right? If you were to give me the over-under on this season for games played at 45, I'm going to take the under on 45 games played. Now, having said that, and it's kind of my concern with Paul George as well, he is going to be afforded the ability to miss games because they are absolutely stacked. I just want to read you the forwards that they have on their roster. So you have Kawhi and you have Paul George. You have Norman Powell, who was starting 2 seasons ago. You have Terrence Mann coming off the bench, who would be arguably a 6th man on more than half the teams in the league. You have Robert Covington, who could be a starter on probably a third of the league, a 6th man on probably 2/3 of the league. You have Luke Kennard, who would be a 6th man on probably a third of the league as well. And you have Marcus Morris, who would be a 6th man on probably half the league. Oh, and by the way, you have Nicholas Batum, who is still going to be in the top 8 rotation for most of the teams in the league. That's your forward situation. So if I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, I have the Clippers winning the West. They're just too loaded. And it isn't like Wall doesn't push them over the edge. I just think if they're playing and they're healthy and you have this much flexibility to rest Kawhi and then Paul George's shoulder and elbow, there's a lot of flexibility here. Having said that, I would still take Kawhi if he's available like the beginning of the third round or probably into third round, and I'll tell you why. I get so much bang for my buck when he's there that if I'm smart and I draft consistent guys across the board, and this is my only gamble, this one's got to pay off big, like big, equivalent to 3 waiver wire guys at $20 or 20 points a pop. So he can only afford to be your one gamble that you take all season. That's when I would take him. But they just have too much of a safety net from the forward position, and I think Paul George is going to run into that. But the thing about Paul George is I think Paul has a desire to get out there. He's got something to prove. I don't think Kawhi has anything to prove. He has his ring. He knows where he is. He's supremely confident in himself. He's very introverted, but I think Paul is in a situation where he doesn't want to be shut down unless he has to. And I think he's more frustrated than anything when he has to get shut down. So Kawhi, he'll gladly take the second of a back-to-back off, but he'll put up, 42, 11, and 9 in the game before and just absolutely make you a killing. So there are a lot of risks there. Parlay that, and we'll transition over to a guy who has very little risk. He's in the trade talks all the time, and I think that's just because, A, Toronto knows that other teams would be interested in him, and because he brings that value, and that's Pascal Siakam. Last season, averaged just under 50% from the field, 75 from the line, 34 from 3. I'm fine with 34% from 3. He doesn't take an enormous amount of shots for his position. Just under 23 points a game, 8.5 rebounds, 5.3 assists. He peppers the stat sheet. Always good for 1 to 1.5 steals. Gave you 1.3 last year. Blocks at 0.6. I'm good at a small forward position. So from a fantasy perspective, he's fantastic. Played 68 games last year. I like the fact that he was in the lineup. I think they're another team that they're wanting to get back in that Eastern Conference final hunt. They definitely have the talent to do that. I think Scotty Barnes really got that city excited. So look for Pascal to have another great season. It does allow him, not allow him, but it makes him a little bit more expendable the more that Scotty Barnes kind of comes up. So there's one of two ways in schools of thought so you can think about this. If Pascal's looking to say, hey, I don't want to leave Toronto, because for all intents, everything he said, it's kind of like Damian Lillard. He doesn't want to leave Toronto. So he could be playing out of his mind to make it almost impossible to trade me. You see what I'm saying? So this could be a really, really big season for him. Borderline All-NBA third team. So I definitely look for him to make the All-Star team this year. Stats should be pretty similar. And if his three-point attempts go up, 34%, I'm not worried about that dipping. So something consistent to what he had last year definitely puts him in the top 10 for forwards in this league, especially what we just talked about with some of the Clippers. What are your thoughts on that?
Much the same. I think that with Pascal, he's just such a solid player. You know what you're going to get in terms of points and rebounds and assists and steals. They're all going to be above average to very good. I think the questions that I have with Pascal are the lack of 3-point field goals made and his free throw percentage. His free throw percentage is not very good. It's somewhere hovering around, 75-ish. You'd like to see that closer to 80 or so. But again, this is a player who's going to play in a lot of games. He may not have the ceiling of some of these other players, but he's going to be a guy who plays and you can count on him, and you basically just know what you're going to get. So this brings us to the next player who you don't know what you're going to get from, and that's the second Clipper in the top 9. That's going to be Paul George. So we know what Paul George is all about. We know that he is an elite level scorer when he's healthy. He's one of those guys who can win you any given week in a fantasy league. So last year, 24.3 points, 6.9 rebounds, 5.7 assists. You put it right in the show notes. When he's on the floor, he is fantasy money. There is no question about it. But there are issues with him in terms of his shoulder, in terms of the load management idea. You just don't know how many games he's going to play. So, when you look at his stats, there's a lot of green out there. The only thing that you can kind of get nitpicky on is his overall field goal percentage. You'd like it to be a little bit higher than 45%. But he's going to make free throws. He's going to hit three threes a game. He's going to score the ball. He's going to get your rebounds, assists. He's going to be an elite level steals guy. And he doesn't turn the ball over that much. And he'll get you a block or so too. So, I think that he's a player who you just take, and much like with Kawhi, you just cross your fingers that you get enough games played to have the value that you want. I think that I'm honestly, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on Kawhi and Paul George, studying up on all the different metrics for my own leagues, because I know I'm not going to get either of them. Because you can bet that in your leagues, you're going to have somebody who's ride or die. That's kind of the buzzword in fantasy circles these days. Somebody's ride or die is going to be Paul George. Somebody's ride or die is going to be Kawhi Leonard, and they're going to be overdrafted. So I'm just likely not going to have either of these guys on my roster. So you talked about Kawhi Leonard, and if he's there in the third round taking him, my bet is he's just not. He's just not going to be available for a lot of people in leagues because somebody's going to overdraft him. So the load management issues are real. The injury issues are real with both of those Clipper players. I think they are going to do their very best to shelter John Wall and George and Kawhi and place a lot of those other players. Certainly if they get out to a hot start, it's good news for the Clippers, and it might be bad news for fantasy owners, because these guys are just not going to be in there for 70, 75 games together. It just isn't going to happen. So that's my thought on George. I think he's a player who he's certainly a number one level forward, but again, you're going to have to probably stack him with somebody else who you can get some more consistency from.
Well, I don't know if that's Steve Ballmer in the back getting pissed of all this slander on the LA Clipper talk, but the difference between Paul George and Kawhi is I don't think Paul looks for reasons to sit where Kawhi does. And to be honest with you, I'm shocked that there isn't more animus between Paul George and Kawhi, because they kind of made this move to LA together with the intent of doing some serious damage. And last year, for Kawhi to go MIA as often as he did, Paul George's shooting percentage is a direct result of him forcing things because he doesn't have the guy who he came there to play for. Do you see what I'm saying? Or play with. So if it wasn't for guys like Reggie Jackson stepping up and Nick Batum having, flashes, the Clippers wouldn't have been as successful as they were. So I actually, my heart goes out to Paul George. I think he wants to win. I think he wants to be on the floor. It might be a scenario that if there's a load management, it'll come from Ty Lue just because he has that much flexibility. So, it'd be interesting to see how much say Paul has in that scenario to say, nah, I'm playing, because they're not going to want to be a 6-7 seed. They're looking to make an impact right out of the gate. So with the 6th pick, we're going with Zion Williamson of the New Orleans Pelicans. It is a tall task to come back from an injury or a season in which you didn't play a single game. Expectations are high now in New Orleans. There's an opportunity for them to make a big splash in the Western Conference, and it's going to be dependent upon his ability to give you something close to the season he had before he was injured. So the addition of C.J. McCollum is going to be huge for his development. We talked about that briefly when we were discussing Brandon Ingram's growth this year. And when he comes back, the maturity of Brandon Ingram over this last season is something to where Zion's not coming in and going to be asked to be, a 25 touches a game type guy. We want to see him. You want to see him giving you 22 points a game, getting you close to 10 rebounds. Physically, he's such a specimen that should fall pretty easy to him. When he's playing that point forward option, setting people up, assists, I think he's got a great relationship with Jonas Valanciunas. I watched some of their Instagram videos together. Those are guys they're an odd couple. I like the way they interact with each other. And I think CJ sets the tone, and from a professionalism standpoint, and I think that really is gonna sit in, and Zion's gonna have a big season. So if he can get you I mean, he shot 61% 2 seasons ago. I'm not anticipating something like that, but with his athleticism and the shot that he's going to have that he didn't have before CJ got there, if he's giving you 55% from the field, 80% from the free throw line, and giving you, 19 or 20 points a game with, close to 10 rebounds from which you're getting the multiplier, weak side blocks is going to be something he's going to be hunting for. So definitely big bang for your buck here on a team that is going to be incentivized to play him. I think we're kind of past the whole managing his minutes. You just have to see what you have with him. You've already paid him. It's time for him to start earning it, and I think that he's going to earn it in a big way this season. What say you?
Well, I'm not even going to spend time on the numbers and projections with Zion. I think that when he's on the floor, there's a chance for these massive blow up games that win you your fantasy week. There's no question in my mind that he could be the number one fantasy player this next season. He really could be. It would not shock me if he was. However, again, this goes back to your own personal team building philosophy. Do you want to take players who have major question marks in terms of injury history and hope that you can hit and kind of shoot for the moon and have a really dominant squad? If you do that, you're also running the risk of having the worst team in the league because your players are just simply not available, and it's not very fun to play in fantasy basketball when you're just scouring the waiver wire each and every night to try to find guys to fill spots. So I just don't know what to think about Zion, because he is, as you said, he's a physical specimen. He is big, strong, explosive, talented. Name it. I mean, there isn't a way to describe him that would be, I guess, inaccurate or overblown. He is a tremendous talent. There's no question about it. I just wonder if his body is made for this, because the injuries that we've seen and the explosiveness that he plays with, I just don't know that he's going to be able to hold up at the NBA level. Granted,
I just don't think he's going to be
asked.
I don't think he's going to be asked to do that now that CJ's there. So it's going to be tough, because I think from a stat comparison standpoint, people are going to look at 2 seasons ago, but that team was a completely different team than what they are. And when you bring in veteran leadership and take CJ out of the mix, Brandon Ingram has absolutely elevated his game and stepped up to where there isn't the necessity. So I'm not saying you baby step him. I'm not saying I definitely don't want to see a minutes restriction. I think we're past that point. But what I'm saying is he's not coming in there saying, all right, we paid you this money, now go get us 25 and a 12. That's not what they need from him right away. And I think if he slow builds to get his stamina, the weight thing, that's irrelevant to me. Guys who can play big, I'm fine with him playing big. I'd rather them play big than play super, super skinny, But if he gets up to speed and he understands that he doesn't need that, to be that number one guy right out of the gate and have this expectation, those are the guys who just naturally become beasts when they need to be beasts, and it's more organic. And with him in particular, I think that organic structure is what's going to just absolutely take him to another level. So I'm excited that the fact that they're not going to need him to be what he was 2 years ago, I think that'll just come naturally because of the lack of necessity for it.
Well, I don't think there's a bigger storyline in fantasy basketball than his return and what he's going to be. I don't disagree with you in terms of the genetic makeup of that team and what they're going to ask him to do. I really hesitate, because you can't just go to Zion and say, okay, don't be as aggressive, don't be as explosive. The injuries that he has, they're not these nagging soft tissue Julio Jones like injuries where it's a hamstring or it's a calf or something like that. My fear is he's going to go up for a dunk and something's going to tear. And maybe this is just me being very risk averse, and it likely is, but I need to see him healthy for a long stretch of time before I say, okay, I'm going to build my entire fantasy basketball team around him. I think that there is just an element of danger that comes with him. And I think that it's obvious. But this season, that storyline is going to be, I think, the storyline to watch in fantasy this year. Those players who are in dynasty leagues and take the plunge on him are either going to be heavily rewarded and looking very pretty for the next 5-6 seasons, or they are going to be very, very disappointed. Because if you want Zion, whether it's a yearly, a fantasy, a keeper, a dynasty, a keeper, whatever it is, you're going to have to take him highly, because you want to talk about name value and exciting players to watch. I mean, he is box office. There's no question about it. So the next player on our list, as we get into the top 5 here, may not be as box office, but he is a player who is uber productive, and that's Domantas Sabonis of the Kings. So that Kings trade last year, where they sent out Tyrese Halliburton and got back Domantas Sabonis, kind of under the radar a little bit, but it shouldn't have been. Domas is a guy who can really, really put up counting stats. Elite level field goal percentage. We're talking somebody who shoots between 55 and 60%. Okay, he's not going to hit a bunch of threes for you, but he's going to get you points, and he's going to get you elite level rebounds. Okay, and he's even going to top it off with 5, 6, 7 assists. He's a player who really, really loves to play. You know, he's a double-double machine. So if you're in a league that rewards double-doubles with a multiplier, he's a great player to have for sure. Doesn't get as many shots as what I would like to see. I think there are some questions about the makeup of that team now with Keegan Murray there. Keegan Murray is going to be a really good player, by the way. And there are some questions here, but I think the pros really outweigh the cons here. And Sabonis, again, may not be, the sexiest pick in the world, but I do think he's going to give you very good to elite level production at a position where you really need it. So I really like him. Plus, it's given his dad something to live for. Arvydas, who is, and I will say it, Arvydas very easily could have been the single greatest big man to ever play had it not been for some injuries and a Cold War, I guess, that kept him away from the United States. But Arvydas was famous after he retired. He had to have heart surgery, so they told him, no more basketball and no more drinking. And he said, well, they might as well take away sex, because those are the only 3 things that I like. So I think he has something else to live for, and that's watching his son Domas play. He really is a spectacular talent. He plays in a market that a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to, but I do think that team is building to change that, and he's an exciting part of it. So thoughts on Domantas from you?
Those damn international conflicts foiled my plans again. No, when this trade went down for Halliburton was, a baby face. Everybody in Sacramento loved him. He loved Sacramento. He was already proclaiming he wanted to retire in Sacramento. When they made this trade, what it says to me is we are done being they have the longest missed playoff in professional sports, if I'm not mistaken. So the longest.
That's the Mariners.
The Mariners.
But
okay,
that's going to end in about another 2 weeks.
Yeah, so
and it may very well be the Kings.
Go Mariners, and the Kings will have in the 4 major sports, the Kings will have the longest period of time without a playoff appearance. So what it said to me is we're done being basement dwellers. We're looking to make moves, and they wouldn't have moved somebody like Tyrese unless they had big plans on not necessarily centering the offense around him, but putting together an offense that really, really played to Domantas' strengths, and he already has a ton of them. Again, sadly, the league has moved so far away from the basket that the double-doubles, the guys who put up double-doubles aren't traditional. If you were to look back 15 years ago, you had almost all the power forwards that we would have been talking about in the top 15 that were double-doubles. Now, with the introduction of the stretch 4 and even centers that play behind the arc, they're just too far away from the basket. So 8.5, 9 is something that is considered good in this league. Domantas is an elite rebounder for today's time. It's laughable considering some of the guys that we saw growing up, but there's the multiplier there that offsets his 3-point shooter percentage in 9-cat leagues. He's serviceable from the free throw line at 75%. Obviously, you'd like to see that go up. I think field goal percentage is something that's always going to be consistent because he's a smart IQ guy. Field goal attempts, I definitely would like to see more. Keegan Murray is a question mark as to whether or not he helps or hurts those prospects, or whether or not some of those shots will come from guys like De'Aaron Fox. So, I think the Kings being motivated to do something tells me that Sabonis is going to get a lot of touches, a lot of opportunities, and a lot of playing time. So, again, if we're talking where's our bar for expectation of games played, I'm going to set it somewhere around 65 for him. And even at 65, I'm probably going to take the under. But that's really all you can expect. That has to be your benchmark, because anything over 65 and you're just blessed. At that point, if you're getting a guy who regularly is giving you over 65 games this season, you can afford to take a pretty significant ding on stats just for aggregate points if you're not a guy who does moves and works off the trade wire. So he's a numbers machine. He's not flashy. He's not going to ever lead the league in jersey sales, but he's definitely somebody you want on your fantasy roster. Now, if you're looking for guys who move jerseys, our next number 4, LeBron James, always in that GOAT conversation, not only in real life, but also from a fantasy perspective. The guy just doesn't age. Last year was an all-star, 52% from the field, 36 from 3, 76 from the line, 30 points a game, which is just unbelievable in his 19th season, 8.2 rebounds, 6.2 assists, 1.3 steals, give you 1.1 blocks, which is it's just ridiculous what this guy can do. And it really makes, when I look at like Zion, for instance, in that season 2 seasons ago where, he was averaging less than 8.2 rebounds, and I sit back and I think some of these guys from power forward position and center position, just they don't have excuses when Father Time's out there just at season 19 giving you 8.2 rebounds. It's just ridiculous to me what this guy can do. So he's always been a fantasy machine. We've been kind of putting dirt on him for the last 3-4 seasons, thinking, this is the year that it starts to taper off. This is the year that it starts to taper off. I think there is a mainstream almost want, like there's a palpable feeling we want to see this guy start to fall off and see chinks in his armor, because we haven't yet. And that's sad, because I think LeBron's greatness is something that we're not going to appreciate until it's gone, and then we're going to wish we weren't so hard on the guy. There's a lot of things that he does that rubs me the wrong way, but from an athletic standpoint, he's second to none, and that's including guys like Mike and Carl, and from a fantasy perspective, there's a lot of people who won't touch LeBron because he's going into year 20, and if he's there in the 3rd round, I'm not going to take him in my first 2 rounds if I'm playing in a 12-person league. But if he's there on the flip in that 3rd round, I'm going to have a hard time not taking a guy like LeBron, just because I think he rolls out of bed, and from a fantasy points perspective, he's going to get you 38 to 40 fantasy points per night. I also think that they're incentivized. That was an embarrassment of what happened last season. And I think it's starting to teeter on an indictment for LeBron and his swan song here with LA. They are hell or high water going to get in the top 4 in the West if they have anything to say about it. And yes, the offense might change, might go through Anthony Davis a little bit more. I'm kind of tired of all the noise when it comes to Russell Westbrook, because, regardless, that guy still is a fantasy stat guy. If he's sitting in later rounds and you don't take Russell Westbrook, you don't deserve to win your league. But LeBron's going to come out motivated, and he's got to light a fire in these guys to say, hey, we need to get out ahead so we're not fighting the last 20 games of the season. I also think that's going to play into how many games he sits. So it's almost like he's taken it as a challenge when people say, you're going to rest on back-to-backs, you're getting too old, this, that, and the other. I love, as a fantasy owner, I love when you have the mindset of, I'm going to throw it in these writers' face, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to play 65 games next season. I'm going to play 70 games next season. He deserves to be in the top 5. I think he's going to be a top 5 player as long as he's in the league, because he's smart enough to know I don't want to be here when my game starts to degrade. He's just too smart to let that happen. So definitely top 5. I challenge you to say anything negative, but Ken, I'm sure you can find something.
I usually can, but this one's going to be pretty tough. You look at his body of work, and it really is unparalleled. There just isn't a comparison to what he's done in 20 seasons in the league. For him to be able to put up the numbers he did in year 19, it is nearly unfathomable to see what this guy is doing at his age. I will never say that he's the best player to ever play. I do think he may very well be the best athlete that the NBA has ever seen. His ability to score, rebound, pass, just across the board, you know what you're going to get from him. And it's funny, he's like Tom Brady, where for the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, everybody's just waiting for him to fail, and he just never does. Now, granted, I don't love a lot of the off the court stuff that he says or has done in the past. I'm a little bit of an old school soul when it comes to players staying with their teams and being more loyal than he has been. But in terms of his game and the way it translates to fantasy, it really has been an incredible ride. And I do think you're right. We're just not going to really appreciate the greatness of LeBron until after everything is done and he's no longer in the league. But I wouldn't put it past him to play 2, 3, 4, 5 more seasons. Who knows? He might very well play with both of his kids, which would be unbelievable.
Bronny's not going to play in the
achievement
league.
If he's able to do that.
Bronny's not an NBA player.
Well, okay. So
he may be rostered. He'll be rostered, but he's not an NBA player. Don't. Let's not do this. You've seen enough talent to know that Bronny's not an NBA player.
I know. Okay. Do I think that if his last name was James, that he would be an NBA player? Likely not. But if you're a team sitting in the second round, like let's say you're the Phoenix Suns or you're the who knows? It doesn't matter. If you're a competitive team that's picking maybe in the second round, and you know that LeBron is playing year to year in LA and he wants to play with his son, there's value in that. I don't care how old he is. If he's 42 years old, I still think that there's value to be had there. There's value in ticket sales. There's value in his game, even if it's limited at that time. I think that somebody is going to take the plunge on Bronny in some capacity just to get a shot at having LeBron come and play for him. I really do.
Well,
you don't think that's going to happen?
No, absolutely not. And if anybody does, they're going to need the quicker picker upper because he's got to piss the bed. He's not ready for it. He's not built for it. And I also think that it takes the
You're accusing Bronny James
of being
Bronny the bed already.
Listen, here's my thing. Is left to his own, and his dad isn't arguably the greatest player of all time, or at least in the running in the top 5, right? That's a tough road to hoe that he has just to get into the league. And I've watched many of his films because I was curious as to whether or not somebody who had a ton of picks, so take Oklahoma City, for instance, if they would put a flyer out. He's already made reference to Sam Presti, like LeBron's made comments about Sam Presti and liking his mentality. And I could see something where you throw him a bone, you have LeBron come to OKC for one season, maybe that leads to a new stadium or a new arena. But you have such expectation. I mean, for Pete's sakes, he went on Sports Illustrated with both of his boys and had the next, it's something to the effect of The Chosen One. It was something like that. And I'm thinking, you are putting such undue stress. I'm surprised that his wife hasn't said, no. Let them do this on their own. You can be there at every one of the games. You can coach them up, and you know there's going to be publicity. You know you're going to be on Bleacher Report and ESPN and all this stuff. But let them be 2 independent men and earn this on their own. And LeBron just can't stay out of the way when it comes to Bronny. And those are 2 biggest shoes to fill. And, it's unfortunate.
Well, I don't think that it's a situation where you take him and you throw him in the lineup and play him 30 minutes a night.
Oh, that's the expectation.
I still think that
if you're a fan base, they're going to have those chants. We want Bronny. It doesn't matter. It won't matter. It'll be so untenable and unfair to Bronny because you'll come in there with the expectation that, and the fans just literally spent the whole fourth quarter saying, we want you, and you go out there and you realize you're not ready. It's a really, really bad thing to do for a kid like that. Now, he may blossom, and he may find his step, and it might start overseas and then something like that. But there were rumors if they did away with the one and done and allowed them to go back to high school, it might be a way to kind of circumvent the whole college process in order to expedite this. And I thought, wow, if we're bending rules to get this kid in the league, he's going to be crucified. There's just, I'm more looking out of the interest of Bronny in particular. So I don't want to see something that blows up in his face, because LeBron's got money, but you can't buy your integrity. Not your integrity, I guess. What's the right word? That's just a big letdown when you realize that everything was inflated because of the last name. So I pray that he grows a little bit more. I think he's undersized for any kind of comparisons to his dad. His game just doesn't translate. His other son, I can't off the top of my head think of what his younger son's name is. I can't remember what his name is, but he actually has more of that body type that's going to translate to LeBron's frame. So, I'd be curious to see what he does over the next couple of seasons. But now, in the interest of Bronny himself, if he has a breakout season, he gets on at, I've been watching some of his recruiting visits. It sounds like Ohio State's going to have, because of the hometown, Ohio, they're going to have a leg up. Oregon was discussed and then quickly shut down. So he's going to go to a power school. They're going to do that for the pub. He's going to make a lot of money there with NIL. I just don't see his game translating. If it does, it's going to be a flyer, and I just hope that he doesn't get set up by a fan base that's looking for him to be something that he just ultimately isn't. But that's too much on Bronny. He's not on the list.
No, he's not. I guess I'll just close with this. I mean, if you're sitting there late, the number of second round draft picks that hit is extraordinarily low. And if you believe that by taking him and giving him a shot or signing him as an undrafted free agent, if you feel like that gives you a leg up in securing the services of his dad for a year or two, I just think that from a business aspect, I'm not even talking basketball. I just think from a business aspect, franchises would be interested in doing that. So
yeah, but you're a minimum with the 1 year deal. You're a minimum of 2 years away from that. So now you're in LeBron's 22nd season. So now you're really pushing out what the expectations are for LeBron, who has more miles than anybody's played. And his body has been banged differently than Kareem was for the amount of minutes that he played. And that's no disrespect or slight. I think he's actually one of the most undervalued players of all time. He revolutionized the game, and a lot of people don't talk about Kareem when they talk about the greatest of all time. But the mileage that he put on versus the mileage that LeBron's put on, LeBron's seen some things. So that's a lot to expect an additional 2 years. It's just, I wish the focus was less on that and more on getting a title in Los Angeles. Because from a fantasy's perspective, if that's his mindset, LeBron's going to be a beast and definitely top 4.
Yeah, until we see him slowing down, I'm all in. He has just, if Father Time and Mother Nature had a child, that child would be LeBron James. Okay. So I don't know, maybe Ime Udoka was hitting on Mother Nature or something. I don't know. Who knows what actually happened there, but let's move forward. All right. So a player who is obviously much younger than LeBron, and a player who has tremendous upside is Jason Tatum of the Celtics. We look at Tatum and we saw what he did in the playoffs. He is just an unbelievable talent. The sky's the limit with him. He's an all-star, all-NBA level player, 27 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists. He's going to get you steals and blocks here and there. He's going to be the focal point of that team. I know they have Jaylen Brown and others, but Tatum's always going to be the guy. He's an alpha. He's a dog when it comes to playing the game. He doesn't back down from anybody. Those stats are really always going to be there, and he's going to play in a high number of games because he is so young. So he's going to be a player who plays 36 minutes a night and really should be able to provide you top 15 numbers. That's what I think, at least. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers in the stat line, I think he's proven that he's consistently going to be not only a top five as far as a forward perspective, but from a fantasy draft perspective, he's a top 10 fantasy guy. Safely pick him in the first round. He will not make the turn. So if you get your chance, you're definitely not going to regret that. He plays, which is another key. He's not a guy who looks to sit and rest. I think he got so close to it last season. For all the similarities that people like to put on, and it's not even that the people put on it, but I think Kyrie puts it on himself that he is the heir apparent to the Kobe Bryant legacy. I see more of Kobe's demeanor, mindset, and mentality in Jason Tatum by far. They had a close relationship as well, and if one thing to take away, when the Lakers lost to the Celtics, when they had that run with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and Rondo, um, LeBron, or the day after the Lakers lost, Kobe was in that gym getting prepared because he was coming back and he was going to win the next year. That was a mental mindset that he has. And Tatum, in a lot of the things that I've seen this offseason, he's mentally preparing himself. He's more casual and laid back than Kobe. He's not as maniacal. I don't think anybody was really wired that way. But I think intrinsically his mindset is, I don't want to be that guy that got this close and isn't back here. And I think that he also understands the importance of what windows look like as far as your opportunity to do something and to compete for a championship. Boston's window, and we've talked about it, the Udoka suspension, that's a big deal because he was a culture change for the Celtics. Robert Williams kind of in and out, this injury with his knee. Is this going to be something that really affects his? If you don't have Robert Williams, you don't make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. He's too big of a component for what they do defensively. You're dependent upon Marcus Smart a lot, and he has been that guy who's been durable for you. How much longer can you go to the well? I think he needs to do a better job with his relationship with Jaylen Brown, and maybe even go to front office and say, hey, check us out. I'm tired of this being up in the air that Jaylen's going to be a moving piece. He's a part of this lineup. I want him here. I'd like to see him be a little bit more of an advocate for his teammates, but I think he's motivated, and a motivated Jason Tatum is going to do nothing but, at the very least, give you the numbers he did last year, which are top round value. I think he's definitely an all-star. He's going to be fighting for All-NBA first team. Look for him to have some talk for MVP in that conversation, especially if Boston is able to get through this Udoka suspension and still be competing for the Eastern Conference lead or Eastern Conference title. So nothing but big things for Tatum, and that's going to be for probably the next 5 or 6 seasons. I'll probably reiterate the same thing next year when I'm talking about him.
No, I agree. And in a dynasty format, it'd be hard pressed for me not to take him in the top 3 or 4 picks overall. Tatum is a guy who, you mentioned his mentality. I think he's going to be somebody who looks at this and says, oh, you think that us losing Udoka is going to make that big of a difference? He just won't care. He'll just go out and ball. And it's going to be fun to watch him grow and develop. Sky's the limit for him. And I think that you're right in terms of his numbers. Last year's statistics should be the floor for him. He's a great young player who plays in a lot of games. Moving forward to the top 2. Number 2 is, again, we talk about risk reward. This might be the greatest risk reward outside of Zion Williamson this year. A player who could be very motivated after wanting out, then agreeing to come back in. We think he's happy. We're not 100% sure. You never know with him because one weird tweet from somebody might put him over the edge. Doesn't have the thickest skin in the world, but when you talk about somebody who is made for scoring in this league and in fantasy, it's hard to find many people better than Kevin Durant. So Durant's going to be back in Brooklyn, giving it another shot here with Kyrie and Simmons. Who knows what that trio is going to look like on the court, but what we do know is Durant is going to be leaned upon to be the elite level scorer that he has been ever since he walked through the door at Oklahoma City from Texas. And I still remember the narrative when he came out. A lot of people saying, well, he's just too thin. He might be a player who can score 20 points a game, but not really sure if he's going to hold up for an entire career. He he has made a living of proving people wrong, and the numbers that he puts up they're really, really hard to beat. Okay, so you just have to kind of weigh this idea of how many games do you need from him in terms of his durability, as he's been aging here, and then also just with the uncertainty with Brooklyn, because that team is just such an absolute enigma. Nobody can figure them out. They got manhandled by the Celtics in the playoffs. Manhandled. Like it wasn't even close. So Durant's going to be a player, though. He's going to give you elite level free throw shooting. He's going to hit threes. He's going to score upwards of 30 points a game. Should be among the league leaders, if not the league leader in scoring. He's going to get you rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. He's going to fill up the stat sheet. And he's going to be a player who you can ride each and every week when he plays. There are a few better in the league, really in fantasy or reality, than Durant. Again, it's one of those risk-reward picks, though. You just don't know for sure what you're going to get.
Yeah, he's the greatest scorer I've ever seen. He's the most efficient scorer that I've ever seen. He's one of those guys that it's like Kyrie, where you just slam your head and you think, what he could be if he would worry less what other people are thinking. But then that's what kind of makes him who he is. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I want you to be somebody different, but yet what you are is so amazing. And that's a direct result of you being different. You know what I'm saying? So it's almost asking him to change his stripes. So he's long enough in the tooth now to say, look, this is who I am. And he's got kind of an effort attitude. I said this earlier with Kyrie, Ben Simmons, if his head's right, and it sounds like now he's on the media circuit. He was on JJ Redick's podcast. First time really openly talking about things that have happened the last 2 seasons. And that's encouraging to me for this reason. If he is engaged and he's got the mindset of, you know what, I'm about to stick it in a lot of people's face. And if Kyrie said, I'm about to remind people why I'm the most gifted guard that's played in the last 25 years. And if Kevin Durant says, I'm the most gifted scorer and I'm about to remind all these people, Brooklyn's going to be a juggernaut, and I don't see anybody in the East being able to, if they get momentum and if they play 65 games and Kevin Durant's not asked to do the lion's share of the defensive responsibility because that's what Ben can do, and they look at Ben and they say, hey man, don't worry about that 3-point shot. We got Joe Harris coming back. Between the three of us, you don't need to shoot a 3 all season. I just need you to play defense, rebound, and let's get our ass out and run. Let's get easy baskets. To put up 125 a night for this Brooklyn squad, they put teams away early. You don't have to rest as much because you're not playing the fourth quarter. They do their damage early. That's another thing I like about Durant. So if he's going to give you a 45-point fantasy night, he can do that in 3 quarters and not play the fourth. That's what that efficiency, that's why that's important. So he's definitely not going to make it past the first round. He's not going to make the turn. There is some risk when it comes to injuries. There is some risk when it comes to, really, as far as off the court antics and things like that, none of that really plays into how he performs on the court. So you have to take him, and you'd be a dummy not to. So there would have to be a really, really, really good reason why you wouldn't. His name value alone, for people that are ignorant, if they happen to get a higher draft pick than you, they'll take him, which might free up somebody like Tatum, who is just, he's got to give you something equivalent as far as the stat line's concerned. But if he falls in your lap and you don't take him, you'll end up biting yourself this season. I can't say that it'll be the same for the next 2 or 3 seasons. I just think this one in particular, they're looking to stick it in some people's faces. So, but as great a season as he's going to have, I really think Giannis Antetokounmpo in Milwaukee, he's our number 1 on our top forwards. He's arguably our number 1 in our overall value for fantasy this season. He had a fantastic summer. He always does. He stays in shape. He keeps the ball in his hand. He's looking to evolve his game. He's shooting a lot of threes. Last season was an all-star, 55% from the field, just under 30% from 3, 72% from the line. A stat line that's a double-double machine, just under 30, 11.6 rebounds, 5.8 assists. He peppers the entire stat sheet. 1.1 steals, 1.4 blocks. For as many touches as he has, he turns it over 3.3, which is fine. You can accept that, knowing that you're getting the multipliers for the double doubles. This guy is as much of a sure thing as you can get. Because I will tell you, in the pantheon of who are the top 3 guys in fantasy over the last 3 seasons, you got Nikola Jokic, you got Luka Doncic, and you got Giannis Antetokounmpo. As far as who do I put my house on, just for durability standpoint, crunch time, and just sheer resilience and guts, I'm going to take Giannis. He's the safest of the 3. Because the thing about Luka is the way that he plays, he gets hit hard and often. And the thing about Jokic is he has a hard time fielding a team that isn't comprised of individuals that are high talent players that are injured, with whether it's Michael Porter Jr. or it's Jamal Murray. You lost Will Barton, who was one of his favorite guys. So he turns crap into gold sometimes over in Denver, but that has to be reciprocated. Giannis doesn't need anybody else to be great from a fantasy standpoint. And this is where you got to separate the player from the fantasy guy and understand who can be successful completely separate from whether or not the team's successful. And I think Milwaukee's going to be fantastic. I think they're going to be fighting for the Eastern Conference. He's going to play a lot. That's just in his DNA. He doesn't know anything different. And he's very durable. He's very consistent. I mean, it starts with him as far as a fantasy roster, as far as I'm concerned. So I take him number 1. I think Luka wins MVP, but I think Giannis is going to be your top fantasy producer for the 2022-2023 season.
Yeah, I love him. I think that there's a tier. We talk a lot about tier-based drafting in fantasy, regardless of.
You don't need to cry, though.
Football,
you don't need to cry. I know it's getting long, but you don't need to cry. We don't need tears here.
Why do you think I'm crying? I'm not crying.
No more tears. You said there's a tier here.
No.
Giannis brings you a tier.
Not like that. Not that kind of a tier. We're talking about putting players in tiers. Okay? So, yes, in terms of a tier 1, I would say Giannis, Durant, Tatum are there in tier 1, but you could even make the case that Giannis is in a tier of his own. So I feel like at this point there should be some type of background, like Tears for Fears music or Tears of a Clown or something that we play at this point. But you really can't go wrong with him. He's just an absolute stud. I think the coolest thing about Giannis is, he's just such a cool cat. He's just such a seemingly nice guy. And the fact that his name can be pronounced by the mainstream people is kind of amazing. I'm like a big Key and Peele guy. So you have that sketch they have with the substitute teacher comes in. Jake Quellen, Balake, D-Nice. People know how to say Antetokounmpo now. And that's pretty amazing to me that people actually understand how to say his name. He has transcended pop culture. So this is a guy who you love to root for. I thought it was really, really cool to see the Bucks win a championship. The small market teams do not have it very easy. He could have very easily said, you know what, I'm a dominant performer in this league and I want to go someplace else, be it Miami or LA or wherever. And he rewarded that city, and they'll never forget that. There's no question about it. So there is something, in fantasy. You like to root for the guys that are on your team. He's a really, really easy guy to root for. And it's even better because he really is potentially the number 1 player in fantasy next year. So, parting thoughts, James? Anything else on your mind before we call it a day?
No, I think the forward position, we combine the 3 and the 4 just because they're going positionless basketball, and the 3 and the 4 essentially are just so interchangeable that it's easier to do it this route. There's definitely value there when you're talking about drafting. You're looking for opportunities for double doubles because that offsets if one of your 9 cats is low. So like takes the bonus as 3-point shooting, for instance. And another benefit is there's a lot of them. So guys who come in, if you kind of work backwards mathematically on the fantasy points per minute, which is how I like to do it, you look for opportunities in a little bit of time, and if you can find a forward that gets you 22 to 25 fantasy points, and that's sitting on the end of your roster. So in the later rounds, that's where it's going to come from. It's going to really come from that forward position, because later rounds for point guards and shooting guards, it's really just points only. And centers, with positionless basketball, the traditional center is all but dead. I'm hoping that it makes a resurgence here in the next 10, 15 years. But the forward position is where you're going to have the most bang for your buck. So it's my favorite position to draft from. I usually load up pretty heavy on forwards. This is just, like I said, this is our top 15 with some honorable mentions. But there's a lot of guys that could be right on the cusp of being honorable mentions and even be flirting with the 15 for this season. So definitely make sure that you have enough room on your roster for flexibility. If you have a guy who is, a guard-forward combo and your roster's a lot for it, I mean, definitely look for that forward position, especially if, like I said, if you shore up a guard in the first couple rounds. So a lot of flexibility in the forward position is my favorite to draft from.
Yeah, good words of advice there for sure. I think there are two major storylines to watch regarding this position. Number one, we touched on it a little bit, and that's Zion, his health, what he looks like, what he can produce this year. And I think the second storyline, and this is more from a reality standpoint, but I think it's going to impact fantasy basketball for the next few years. What happens in Brooklyn this year is going to be really closely monitored, because the time of the three-man super team may be coming to a close. It hasn't been as successful as a lot of these players have wanted it to be. And there have been some times here over the last few years where it's just really blown up on franchises. And when it blows up badly. And you see a lot of these teams mortgaging 3, 4, 5, 6 years worth of draft picks to try to acquire some of these stars. And they're really, really trying to really buy a championship. And if they make it, it's worth it. But if they don't, then it's going to put some of these franchises in harm's way moving forward. So that's going to do it for us today. We're going to come back tomorrow, and we're going to have the center position. We'll talk through all the different centers, obviously highlighted by one big man in Denver. So we'll see you next time on the Fantasy Basketball Podcast.